Narcissism is not a synonym for asshole. I think the way this term is used, and it's used a lot these days, I think generally people use it uh, as kind of a more sophisticated sounding way to say obnoxious prick. And that's not really what the term means. And I think if people really had a good grasp of what the term means, and when I got a really good grasp of what that term means, it explained everything. It explains all of the behavior that you're seeing out there that it seems so confounding that it's just like, why are people acting this way? Why are they thinking like this? Why are they so unreachable by just conversation? And why do I know I'm talking? It's just, why don't they seem to be hearing this? And if you understand it, what narcissism really is, I think it just makes all of this make so much more sense, and I think it helps uh, grapple with it and deal with it, right? So it, here's the sort of description of narcissism that I think uh, works really well. Okay, so narcissism is a developmental issue that makes the person incapable of relating to any perspective other than his own, right? So incapable of relating to any perspective other than his own. What is in his head and the world on the other side of his face is experienced as one thing. Other people have perspectives and opinions. The narcissist apprehends the world as it is. And this means that not agreeing with him makes you wrong and intellectually inferior to him by definition. And not conforming to his conception of what is good and moral makes you bad and immoral, morally inferior to himself by definition. And this is kind of the most frustrating part with dealing with these people, is that you can't reason with them. It's kind of pointless, because being able to reason properly, effectively, excuse me, requires the ability to relate to a perspective that's different than your own. You have to be able to go, okay, from that person's point of view, he sees what he's looking at in this particular way. Maybe there's something to that that I haven't looked at or haven't considered, right? Narcissists can't do that. It's not that they are being obnoxious. They're obnoxious, don't get me wrong, but it's not like they're going, I'm not going to do that. It's that what you're saying doesn't register with them as that's a potentially valid other perspective, because all they can relate to is what's in their own mind. When they wake up in the morning and open their eyes, the world is what they're seeing, conceiving of, interpreting, their ideas, their preferences, their biases. That is the world, as opposed to understanding that as the way I'm interpreting the world in my head, based on all of my experiences and personality type and my own, you know, intelligence or education and all these other factors that are shaping my interpretation of the world out there on the other side of my face. That's not what they do. They wake up and the world is what's in their head. Like a way to think of it is, imagine a base camp with, a mountain, and we're going to climb the mountain. And you leave your base camp at 7 in the morning and you start climbing the mountain. And for the first portion of your climb, the ground is very mossy and wet and muddy, and it's hard to get a good footing. It's very slippy. And when you look around, all you can see is thick, dense forest. And that's like that for this portion of this climb that you're doing. It's just the same thing. It's all like this thick, dense forest. But eventually, you get above the tree line, and the ground becomes firmer, becomes more rocky. You get a good foothold, and you can look out on this vista with the trees below you and see these plains stretching off to the horizon, and then way off in the distance you can see the ocean. And so now uh, the next guy, he wakes up a bit later than you, an hour later, and he starts climbing the mountain. And he's climbing up, and he's looking at the ground beneath his feet, and it's mossy and wet, and he's slipping and hard to get a good foothold. And everywhere he looks around him is just thick, dense trees. And you call down to him from your vantage point, and you say, "Hey, it's great. What I'm seeing is the trees below me, and this beautiful vista, very clear across these plains. You can see the ocean way off in the distance." And the guy below you yells at you, "You're nuts. I'm looking around, and what I see is trees, and it's wet and damp, and it's all there is. You're crazy. Why are you lying? Are you evil? Are you trying to mislead me for some reason? Are you hoping that I don't continue uh, the climb, and that I go off in the wrong direction? Are you gaslighting me?" That's the narcissist, right? So he's not uh, choosing to be obtuse. He's not choosing to not agree with you for the sake of it. He can't conceive of a perspective other than his own. And that's what you're dealing with. And I think once you get that, everything makes more sense. So I'll give you an example of this, right? So I'm going to show you this guy, David Moscrop. He's a great example of uh, the Canadian left. And this characteristic, this narcissism, I will argue, is very, very prominent on the left, on people who gravitate towards the left, have these narcissistic traits. And I think that's a good way to talk about it. Rather than saying the left are like this, the left is narcissistic, it's better talking about it as people who have this narcissism tend to gravitate to the left. So it's not about partisanship, right? That's the point. It's not about, well, I don't like the left, so I'm going to put all these labels on them. It's about human behavior and human psychology and looking at how people demonstrate the way they process the world and think about the world and articulate their vision of the world. And my argument would be that people who are narcissistic tend to gravitate to the left because left-wing politics and left-wing ideology validate those traits. They even make a virtue of having those traits, right? So much of the left-wing worldview is about your truth, right? It's about subjectivity. And if you are a narcissist who your worldview is all about the way I see the world, you can't tell me that I'm wrong. You can't tell me that I need to take someone else's perspective into consideration before reaching my conclusions. That is extremely appealing to people with narcissistic tendencies. To say to them that your image of yourself, your sense of your own identity as being morally excellent and infallibly correct, we're going to validate that. And the way you know you're morally excellent and infallibly correct is that you adhere to all of these concepts and ideas. And that's the left. So here, David Moscrop, who is a journalist and again very typical of Canadian journalists, especially of his generation, but not exclusively, as we'll see. Um, Here he is. He's sharing this article from the National Post, which is drawing attention to the problem with uh, the transgender industry in Canada, how out of control it's become, and the lack of enthusiasm for the medical establishment to step up and to stop all of this, to impose some rationality and sensible controls over what's going on with all of this transgender stuff, especially around children, like other countries have done, like the UK has done, where I think within the last, was it 6 months ago, maybe a year, the Tavistock transgender clinic was shut down for these very reasons. Um, it's way more spoken about out loud. It's way more of a discussed issue in countries outside of Canada. In Canada, it's just this culture of terror to look like you're exposing yourself to anything that could be identified or labeled as bigotry or racism or anything you want to put a phobia at the end of, right? So anyway, here is David Moscrop, his view that he's expressing on the National Post's opinion piece about physicians stepping up and stopping these excesses within this transgender industry. So David writes, weird conservative extremism like this is going to alienate normal people who aren't obsessed with other people's bodies. But by all means, have at this dangerous but losing strategy, right? And it's Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada, who was the original one sharing this, and he's quoting the piece saying, it's time Canadian medical leaders stood up to gender medicine. Right, so I mean, off the bat, David is parroting this uh, trend in the U.S. from the Democrats of calling Republicans weird, right? So this has happened all over uh, Twitter, X, from the left. They just started parroting this same, oh, Pierre Poilievre's weird. Oh, the conservatives are weird. I mean, it's mindless and stupid, but it just shows this enthusiasm for groupthink that the left engage in. They just adopt this kind of generic sloganeering and talking points and repeat them as their own. And they don't seem to notice how cultish and robotic and how they're proving that they lack any kind of independent thinking. They just jump on these bandwagons. So, I mean, there's that. But to get to more of the point about uh, narcissism here. So what's his overall premise here? His argument is that calling for medical leaders to stand up against this gender medicine uh, is not normal, right? What is normal in David Moscrop's worldview? Normal is reflecting David Moscrop back to David Moscrop, right? Normal is his perspective on this. Anything other than his perspective is abnormal. It's not, oh, I recognize not everybody agrees on this. It's, there's the way this appears to me, and then you're crazy. That's the alternatives. Um, it's dangerous, all of this kind of talk, right? So this is this trait of narcissists, where anything other than my perspective is corrupt, is abnormal. There's no plausible explanation for not seeing this exactly the way I do. And this is why people like David don't feel any obligation to make an actual argument, to point out why there's something wrong or abnormal about the perspective that Polyev and the uh, writers of the opinion piece have put forward. He just declares it as it's bad, evil, abnormal, dangerous, because it's not the reality. It's not reality. Reality is what I see the world as. Right? And the interesting thing, too, about the original myth of Narcissus, so you had Narcissus staring at his own reflection in the water and being obsessed with it, and so captured by it he couldn't tear his gaze away. One of the key components of that myth that Joseph Campbell would make a point of making sure people were aware of drawing people's attention to, is that Narcissus is not aware that he's looking at himself. Right? That's the key thing in narcissism. That the narcissist isn't conscious that he's in love with himself. Right? So, and that's the thing. It's not self-love in that sense. Right? It's obliviousness to being obsessed with one's own interior, right? Seeing oneself reflected back to oneself, if that's how you would say that, uh, is what people fall in love with. And the transgender thing is a great example of that, particularly with kids. But it's all of these issues on the left. But with the transgender thing, the narcissism is wrapped in this facade of altruism, of benevolence, right? These people always talk about how they represent this concern for other people, that they care about other people's well-being, and not agreeing with them is the opposite of caring about other people, right? Like he said, here, you who aren't obsessed with other people's bodies, right? So that's that thing in narcissism where they're telling themselves that this is about other people, but it's actually about, I care more about other people than those people over there do. I'm a better person than those people over there because I care about those other people so much, right? And obviously, I would say that the reason that the transgender thing is such a great example of how that is a self-delusion is that if you cared about, specifically kids, then you would be extremely cautious about an ideology that turns our understanding of how child development works on its head overnight. That we've gone from thinking, well, they're not old enough to understand the implications of these. Like that was just a universally understood phenomenon of child development, to now we're saying that children have the capacity to discern that they should have been born in a different body. And as adults, it's our job to validate that, right? This is an extraordinary overturning of the way we've understood children and the responsible role of adults with children's perceptions of things. It's like overnight we've just tossed that away and replaced it with this concept that really makes no sense whatsoever. And that this concept is justifying adults imposing these medical interventions on children including pumping them full of pharmaceutical products to stop their natural biological development. And the reason for this is because we are helping children become who they really are, as if their natural biological development isn't who they really are. And it goes to the extreme of even surgical mutilation on children. And all of this is happened within a very short period of time. And the David Mosscrops and the other ideologues on the left are embracing this without any real concern with the potential of what most of us, I think, would see as not potential, it's self-evident, but the potential, at the very least, of extreme, long-lasting, if not permanent harm to kids. But again, they are so infatuated with the gratification they get from believing in their own moral exceptionalism that that's all they can see. They're blinded by that. And because they don't realize they're infatuated with themselves, with their own egos, with their own idealized self-conception, they tell themselves it's that thing out there, those people that I care about. It's not, it's themselves. Right? And so that's what we're seeing in transgenderism, and we're seeing it here with David Mosscrop, where not conceiving of the world the way David conceives of it isn't even that it's incorrect, or let's examine your point of view and I'll point out what's wrong with it. It's just declared not normal. My perspective on this is normal because it's not a perspective. I'm apprehending this as it is, as universal truth. I have direct apprehension of it. You guys, Pierre Poilievre and the writers of this column, and anybody who agrees with it, either have something wrong with you where you can't see objective reality the way I do, or you are malevolent, or both. So let's look at another example of this, just quickly. It's Andrew Coyne, who is another exceptional example of this phenomenon. Again, another Canadian journalist, not on the left, not necessarily on the right. Andrew's a statist. So whoever is best representing the authority of the state, he'll support that. That's why he can support Justin Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act on the truckers and freezing bank accounts, but also be critical of Justin Trudeau in terms of his overall government and governing style. His sort of official, I guess, political orientation would be conservative generally, but because Pierre Poilievre represents or criticizes sort of the institutions and the assumptions and the status quo of the state, then Andrew Coyne is extremely critical of Poilievre. And it's not about criticism. It's just he hates Poilievre, like he hates Trump. It's not rational. It's not criticism. It's you're a bad person for not conforming to the status quo. So here's an example of this with Andrew Coyne. He wrote, "This isn't about conservatives versus progressives. It's about Trump/MAGA versus normality." So do you notice a trend here? Again, it's the same thing. It's normality is defined by Andrew as what he thinks, and being abnormal is thinking the way people who support Trump think, right? There's no discussion, there's no debate, there's no argument, there's no attempt to relate to the perspective of people who might hold a different opinion to Andrew. It's just they're dismissed as there's something wrong with them. And this is, again, that same narcissistic perspective. You either reflect me back to me, or you're not normal. So, another quick example here. Another Canadian journalist, Bruce Arthur, he's just awful for this kind of stuff. Like, always presenting his own perspective as the standard by which everybody in the world must be judged. And it's just shameless declaration of people who don't affirm his opinions on things as being beneath him and inferior to himself. So this was a reaction he gave to the opening ceremony debacle at the Olympics in Paris, when people obviously had a negative reaction to what they perceived to be a significant moment of their religious belief being mocked and denigrated with this kind of decadence and attitudes that are absolutely contrary to their religious beliefs. Reasonable enough, right? You might disagree with them. You might think that they overreacted. There's all kinds of criticisms or reasons to not agree with them, but that's not what we see here. This is what Bruce said in his response. He said, "I wish I could convey how irrelevant the frothing right-wing outrage over the Last Supper element in the ceremony is over here. Just a galactically Gallic level of indifference, which is one more reason to admire the French." Right, again, what is the mindset that's being articulated here? It's your perception of this is irrelevant, right? So Bruce Arthur is determining whether or not someone's interpretation or feelings or reaction to what they saw is relevant or irrelevant. He, of course, is entitled to have his reaction to their reaction and not be dismissed as irrelevant, but other people aren't entitled to their reaction because it's not reflecting Bruce Arthur back to himself. You know, and this is tied in with the self-aggrandizement and the moral posturing and inflation that you see. You know, and of course it's not just people in the media. Like, here's an example of somebody tweeting, and you see this kind of thing constantly. This person, in what universe is being left-wing somehow evil, wrong, or bad? Why does being a lefty get such bad press? And here it is, when it is in effect caring for others and humanity. Surely it is only the greedy who hate us. Is the idea of sharing and caring too much for them? Again, the mindset being articulated here is there is nothing deserving of criticism about people like me, because people like me are morally excellent. And clearly, if you don't agree with me, if you find some reason to fault me in any way, or to fault my worldview, or people who think exactly like me, the only explanation for that is that you are morally inferior to me, right? I'm caring too much, and that bothers you somehow, right? Simply declaring your moral superiority isn't going to work anymore. It's not good enough. We've done that, and we've realized where that's got us. So that's, to me, a big part of understanding where we are, who we're dealing with, how we got here, to understand what narcissism really is. It's a cognitive developmental issue. It's not an attitude. It's not just arrogance. It's not just being obtuse. It's they cannot see other perspectives. They are blind to them. And I think if we know that that's what we're dealing with, I think we will approach our interactions with these people much better in a much more effective way. So good luck out there.
This is going to get ugly.
Never okay.